I should have known something was wrong when my father insisted on giving his speech first. It wasn't traditional. That honor usually went to the best man or the father of the bride later in the evening, after dinner, after the champagne had made everyone relaxed and sentimental. But Richard Matthews didn't follow traditions unless they served his purposes, and he'd made it clear that he would speak first or not at all. Standing there at the head table in his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, navy blue, because he said black was for funerals and gray was for men without imagination, my father commanded the room the way he commanded every room he entered. At 63, he still had the presence of a man who'd built a real estate empire from a single property investment 30 years ago. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his posture impeccable, and that smile, God, that smile, was the same one he used to close multi-million-dollar deals and charm city council members into rezoning neighborhoods. My new husband Jake squeezed my hand under the table as Dad tapped the microphone. I felt Jake's thumb trace small circles on my palm, a gesture he always used when he sensed my anxiety. He'd been doing it a lot during the wedding planning, especially during every interaction with my father. "Good evening, everyone," Dad began, his voice warm and practiced. "For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Matthews, Sarah's father, and I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate this special day." The pause before "special" was subtle, but I caught it. So did Jake. His circles on my palm stopped. "My daughter Sarah has always been, well, let's just say she's needed guidance," he started, and nervous laughter rippled through the reception hall. I saw my college roommate Claire shift uncomfortably at table 7. My cousin Jennifer took a long sip of wine. Dad chuckled, as if he was just a charming father about to tell an endearing story about his little girl. When she told me she was marrying a public school teacher, I thought it was another one of her phases. Like that time she wanted to be a marine biologist after watching a documentary on dolphins. Do you remember that, Sarah? You were 16 and convinced you'd move to Hawaii. A few people laughed, uncertain. I forced a smile, my face feeling like plastic. Or when she dropped out of the business program I paid for, full tuition at Wharton, mind you, to study social work at a state school. The way he said, social work, made it sound like I'd announced I was joining a cult. The laughter died. My cheeks burned hot, and I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. Some sympathetic, some curious, some belonging to my father's business associates who were probably enjoying this validation of whatever they'd said about my choices over their golf games. Jake's jaw clenched beside me, and I felt his hand tighten around mine. I glanced at him and saw the muscle in his temple twitching, the way it did when he was trying very hard not to say something he'd regret. Jake was 6'2" and built like he still played college baseball, but he was the gentlest person I'd ever met. Right now, though, he looked like he wanted to vault over the table. But Sarah's always been stubborn, haven't you, sweetheart? My father looked directly at me now, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had, I realized. Not when I graduated high school with honors. Not when I got accepted to Wharton. Not even when I'd successfully placed 15 kids from the foster system into permanent homes last year through my work at the nonprofit. Never could see the bigger picture, he continued. Never understood that the Matthews name means something in this city. My father built our first properties with his own 2 hands. I turned that into Matthews Real Estate Group. 47 commercial properties, 18 residential developments, and a portfolio worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. And I did it so my children would have opportunities, so they could marry well, build upon what we created. My mother, sitting to my father's left in her champagne-colored mother of the bride dress, stared intently at her plate. Her perfectly manicured hands were folded in her lap, and she had that expression she always wore during my father's speeches, blank, pleasant, absent. I'd seen that expression my entire childhood. Every time Dad went on one of his rants about standards, and legacy, and what people will think. And now she's throwing it all away to live in some cramped apartment on a teacher's salary. Dad gestured vaguely toward Jake, not even looking at him. Doing charity work that, let's be honest, won't change anything. You can't save everyone, Sarah. I tried to tell you that. Some people are meant to lead, and some are meant to follow. You were raised to lead. The room had gone completely silent. I could hear the clink of ice in someone's water glass, the distant sound of traffic from the street outside the venue. My maid of honor Emma, standing near the DJ booth, had her phone out, her face tight with anger. Uncle Tom, my father's younger brother, was shaking his head slowly. Several of my friends from the nonprofit looked outraged. Jake's family, his mother, his 2 sisters, his grandmother, sat at table 3 looking like they'd been slapped. So here's to Sarah and Jake. My father raised his glass, and the gesture seemed almost mocking. May they be happy with their modest choices. May they find fulfillment in their little apartment, doing their important work for people who will never appreciate it. And Sarah, sweetheart, when reality sets in, and it will, you know where to find me. He drank. Most people didn't. The toast fell flat, landing in the room like a stone in water, sending out ripples of shock and discomfort. I felt tears threatening, felt the familiar shame rising in my chest, the same shame I'd felt at 16 when he'd mocked my marine biology dream in front of his business partners, the same shame from when he'd called me stupid for changing my major. But before I could process any of it, before anyone could attempt a polite golf clap or try to move past the moment, my maid of honor Emma stood up abruptly, her phone still in her hand, now connected to the venue's sound system. Actually, she announced, her voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence like a knife, I have something to add to that speech. Emma's voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking slightly as she held her phone up. She'd been my best friend since sophomore year of college, when we'd bonded over terrible dining hall coffee and a shared love of old movies. She knew everything, every cruel comment my father had made over the years, every time I'd called her crying after another family dinner that was really just an interrogation about my life choices, every moment I doubted myself because of his relentless criticism. Sarah asked me to play this only if necessary, Emma said, making eye contact with several guests, then landing her gaze squarely on my father. I think we've reached that point. My father's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that might have been concern. Emma, I don't think this is the appropriate. With all due respect, Mr. Matthews, you lost the right to decide what's appropriate about 3 minutes ago. Emma's finger hovered over her phone screen. Everyone here deserves to know who you really are. She pressed play, and my father's voice filled the room through the same sound system he'd just used to humiliate me, but this wasn't from 5 minutes ago. This was from 3 months earlier. A phone conversation I'd recorded on a Thursday night in November, after I'd finally installed a call recording app when his advice calls had escalated from uncomfortable to unbearable. The audio quality was crystal clear. I'd made sure of that. You're making a mistake, Sarah. The biggest mistake of your life. My father's voice boomed through the speakers, angrier than the controlled tone he'd just used. This was the voice he used in private, the one without an audience to perform for. That man will never amount to anything. Do you know what my associates said when I told them my daughter was marrying a teacher? They laughed. Actually laughed. Doug Patterson asked me if you were pregnant and had to get married. That's what people think. You're humiliating me. Asterisk. I watched the color drain from several faces around the room. My father had gone very still, his champagne glass frozen halfway to the table. My own voice came through next, younger sounding. Tired. Dad, I love Jake. He's kind, he's brilliant with his students, he makes me happy. Happy. My father's recorded laugh was bitter, nothing like the charming chuckle he'd used during his speech. Happiness is a luxury you earn through success, not some fantasy you chase with a nobody. I built an empire so you could marry someone worthy of the Matthews name. A doctor, a lawyer, someone from our circle. A Cumberland, a Morrison, a Chen, families that matter. Instead, you choose this charity case who'll be teaching algebra to ungrateful teenagers for 40 years. Asterisk. Jake's hand had gone rigid in mine. I squeezed it, trying to tell him without words that I was sorry, that I'd never wanted him to hear these things, that my father's poison had nothing to do with Jake's worth. Jake is not a charity case, asterisk my recorded voice said, stronger now. He has a master's degree in education. He's published research on literacy intervention, and he changes kids' lives every single day. That matters more than. It matters to no one. Asterisk my father interrupted. In 10 years, those kids won't remember his name. In 20 years, he'll be a burned-out public employee with a pension that won't cover a decent retirement. Is that what you want? To struggle, To clip coupons and worry about car repairs. Asterisk. I heard someone gasp. It might have been Jake's mother, who taught third grade for 35 years before retiring. The recording continued, and I watched my father's face cycle through emotions: shock, anger, calculation. He was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to regain control of the narrative. That was what he did best. I've already spoken with Richard Cumberland's son. You remember Blake, don't you? Went to Harvard Law, just made junior partner at his firm. My father's voice took on a conspiratorial tone, like he was sharing a brilliant strategy. He's willing to overlook your little rebellious phase here. Says he always thought you were attractive, even back in high school. I can make this Jake problem disappear. Pay him off, relocate him if necessary. There's a teaching position opening up in Portland. I have connections on the school board there. $50,000 in his pocket, a new job, and you'll be free to make the right choice. You'll thank me later, Sarah. You'll see I was right. Asterisk. The silence in the reception hall was deafening. It was the kind of silence that follows a car crash, when everyone's brain is trying to process what just happened, when the world feels suspended between the before and the after. My father's face had gone from red to chalk white. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Around the room, guests stared at him in horror. Mrs. Chen, whose son Michael my father had apparently deemed suitable, looked disgusted. Doug Patterson, who'd apparently laughed about my marriage, was staring down at his plate like he wished he could disappear into it. My mother, sitting beside my father in her champagne dress, had finally looked up from her plate. For the first time in my 28 years of life, I saw her look at my father with something other than resigned acceptance. Her expression held anger, yes, but also something deeper. A kind of awakening, as if she were seeing clearly for the first time in decades. Uncle Tom had his arm around his wife, both of them looking at my father like he was a stranger. Jake's grandmother, 84 years old and sharp as a tack, shook her head slowly and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "What kind of man tries to buy off his daughter's happiness?" But Emma wasn't finished. She'd promised me she'd go all the way if it came to this, and Emma never broke her promises. She reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope, the thick cream-colored kind with a law firm's letterhead embossed in the corner. The kind that meant serious business. "Sarah also asked me to give this to you, Mr. Matthews," Emma said, walking across the reception hall in her emerald green bridesmaid dress, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Every eye followed her. "If you went through with your planned humiliation today." She placed the envelope directly in front of my father, right next to his untouched prime rib. "She knew you would," Emma said softly, but the microphone picked it up. "She's known you her whole life." My father's hands trembled as he picked up the envelope. I'd never seen him tremble before. Richard Matthews didn't tremble. He made other people tremble. But now, As he slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the 3-page letter, I watched something crack in his perfect composure. His eyes scanned the document, and I knew the exact moment he understood what he was reading. His face went gray. The paper shook in his hands. It was time. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and found my voice. "This is a letter from my lawyer," I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I stood up. Jake rose with me, his hand finding the small of my back, grounding me. "You see, Dad, while you were busy calling me naive and stupid, while you were plotting with Blake Cumberland behind my back, while you were planning to bribe the man I love to leave the state, I was documenting everything." I took a breath, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me, but this time it felt different. This time, I wasn't the victim of my father's public shaming. This time, I was taking back my story. Every cruel call, every manipulative conversation, every threat disguised as fatherly concern. That recording was just one of 17 I have saved on a secure cloud drive, each one dated, time-stamped, and backed up in 3 separate locations. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once in his life, Richard Matthews had nothing to say. The letter explains that I'm formally resigning from the board of Matthews Real Estate Group, effective immediately, I continued. "I know that probably delights you. You've made it clear for years that I was a disappointment as a board member anyway, more interested in community impact than profit margins. But here's what might not delight you. I'm also publicly renouncing any claim to inheritance or family money." I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Uncle Tom leaned forward in his chair. "I don't want it, Dad. I don't want a single dollar that comes with the condition of your approval or your control. I don't want to spend the next 30 years of my life waiting for you to die so I can finally be free to make my own choices. I'm freeing myself right now." Jake's hand pressed more firmly against my back, and I could feel him radiating pride beside me. His family at table 3 was watching me with expressions of support and admiration. His mother had tears in her eyes. "But here's the important part," I said, and I let a small smile cross my face. "The part my lawyer really enjoyed writing. I've given copies of all those recordings to 3 major news outlets, along with a detailed timeline of your attempts to interfere in my relationship. They're sitting in journalists' inboxes right now, with instructions to publish if you ever, and I mean ever, publicly disparage me, Jake, or our life choices again." My father found his voice then, rough and strained. "You wouldn't. Do you have any idea what that would do to the family business? To our reputation?" "I would," I said simply. "And you're right, I do know what it would do. That's why I'm hoping you'll make the smart choice for once and just leave us alone. But if you can't help yourself, if you feel compelled to badmouth your daughter's marriage at the country club or to your business associates, if you try to sabotage Jake's career or interfere in our lives in any way, then yes, Dad, I absolutely will let them publish. And the world can decide what they think about Richard Matthews. the real estate mogul who tried to bribe his daughter's fiancé to leave the state. I paused, looking around the room at all the people who'd enabled this for years. The friends who'd nervously laughed at his jokes. The business associates who'd turned blind eyes to his cruelty. The family members who'd stayed silent. You taught me to see the bigger picture, Dad. You drilled it into me my entire childhood. Think strategically, Sarah. Consider all the angles. Anticipate your opponent's moves. Well, here it is. The bigger picture. You've spent my entire life trying to control me with money and fear and shame. You've made me feel small and stupid and ungrateful for wanting something different than what you wanted for me. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through. Today, in front of everyone who matters to you, your business partners, your country club friends, your associates from city council, you tried one last time. You couldn't just let me have one day. One single day to be happy without your commentary on how I'm failing to live up to the Matthews name. I saw tears on several faces now. Claire, my college roommate, was crying openly. Even some of my father's own friends looked uncomfortable, ashamed. But I'm not that scared little girl anymore, Dad. I'm not 16 years old, crying in my room because you mocked my dreams at a dinner party. I'm not 21, changing my major and wondering if I was making a huge mistake because you said I was throwing my life away. I'm 28 years old. I'm a licensed social worker. I've helped dozens of families, and I'm married to a man who thinks I'm extraordinary exactly as I am. Jake's arm came around my waist fully now, and he kissed my temple. I don't need your empire. I don't need your approval. I don't need your money or your connections or your validation. I just need you to leave me alone. Let me live my life. Let me be happy. And if you can't do that, if you can't manage even that basic level of respect, then those recordings go public and you can explain to everyone why your daughter chose to expose you rather than maintain your precious reputation. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping back. You ungrateful, this is how you repay everything I've done for you. Everything I've given you. You gave me things, Dad. Tuition and clothes and cars. But you never gave me what I actually needed, which was a father who loved me unconditionally. Who was proud of me for being kind instead of successful. Who cared more about my happiness than his image. Before he could respond, before he could launch into whatever defensive tirade was building behind his eyes, my mother stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately, and the entire room watched as she removed her diamond bracelet, the one she wore to every formal occasion, the one I'd seen glittering on her wrist at 1,000 family events. She walked over to me, and I saw that her hands were shaking too, but not with fear. With something else. Something like resolve. This was my mother's, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying in the silent room. Your grandmother Eleanor. She wore it when she married for love the first time, before he died in the war. Before she married into the Matthews family and spent 40 years regretting it. She pressed the bracelet into my hands, closing my fingers around the cool metal and stones. She told me once, near the end, that she wished she'd been brave enough to choose love over security. I didn't understand what she meant then. My mother's eyes, the same hazel as mine, met my gaze directly. I understand now. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. Prouder than I've ever been. She glanced back at my father, and her expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, steel wrapped in silk. I'll be staying at the Hilton tonight, Richard. My lawyer will contact you Monday morning. The reception hall erupted in whispers, gasps, the sound of 200 people trying to process what they were witnessing. But through it all, I heard one voice clearly. "Sit down, Richard." The voice came from the back of the reception hall, strong and clear despite its age. My grandfather, my father's own father, stood near the entrance with his walker, his 92-year-old frame somehow commanding more presence than my father ever had. Henry Matthews Sr. rarely spoke at family gatherings anymore. He'd had a stroke 3 years ago that had slowed him down, made him retreat from the business he'd founded, made him choose his words carefully because they tired him out. But when he did speak, everyone listened. Even my father. Especially my father. "Sit down," Grandpa Henry repeated, shuffling forward slowly, his walker scraping against the hardwood floor. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. "You're embarrassing yourself and this family." My father's face went purple. "Dad, you don't understand what she's." "I understand perfectly." Grandpa Henry made his way to the center of the room, and I saw Jake's uncle move to help him, but the old man waved him off. He wanted to do this himself. I heard every word. The speech, the recording, all of it. And I'm ashamed. Ashamed that I raised a son who thinks cruelty is the same thing as strength. He paused to catch his breath, and the entire room waited. No one moved. No one spoke. "You want to talk about the Matthews name, Richard? About legacy?" Grandpa Henry's voice grew stronger. "I built my first property with my own hands because I wanted my family to have something. Not so they could lord it over others. Not so they could measure people's worth by their bank accounts. I wanted security, yes, but more than that, I wanted my children to have the freedom to choose their own paths." He looked at me then, and his weathered face softened. "Your grandmother and I used to talk about you, Sarah. She died when you were 10, but she knew even then what kind of person you were becoming. Kind, compassionate, strong in ways that have nothing to do with money." Tears spilled down my cheeks. I remembered Grandma Eleanor, remembered sitting in her garden while she told me stories about the old days, before Matthew's real estate, before the money, when they'd lived in a small apartment and my grandfather had worked construction during the day and real estate on weekends. "Your grandmother would have loved Jake," Grandpa Henry said, glancing at my husband. "She would have seen what I see, a man who chose a profession because he wanted to make a difference, not because he wanted to make a fortune. There's honor in that. There's more honor in that than in 30 years of buying buildings and pushing papers." My father tried again, his voice desperate now. Dad, the business needs. The business. Grandpa Henry shook his head. Is that all you think about? I gave you that company, and you turned it into something I barely recognize. You forgot that buildings are just buildings, Richard. They're not worth destroying your family over. They're not worth losing your daughter's respect. They're not worth becoming the kind of man who tries to bribe away his child's happiness. The silence was absolute. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. Your daughter showed more backbone in 5 minutes than you've shown in 30 years of business, Grandpa Henry continued. She stood up here and risked everything. Her inheritance, her family relationships, everything, because she knew what mattered. That's courage, Richard. That's what real strength looks like. Maybe if you'd spent less time building empires and more time building relationships, you'd understand that. He shuffled forward toward our table, and this time he accepted Jake's uncle's assistance. When he reached us, he pulled me into a hug that smelled like Old Spice and peppermint, the same way he'd smelled my entire childhood. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, he whispered in my ear. Prouder than you'll ever know. He pulled back and pressed an envelope into my hands, similar to the one Emma had given my father but smaller, more worn. A little wedding gift, he said loud enough for others to hear. Not Matthew's real estate money. This is from my personal account, from before your father took over the company. Money I saved from those early construction jobs, investments I made on my own. Your grandmother and I always kept it separate, just in case. He patted my hand. Use it wisely, or use it foolishly. Take a honeymoon in Bali or buy a house or donate it all to charity. It's your choice to make, and whatever you choose will be the right choice because it's yours. I clutched the envelope, overwhelmed. Grandpa, I can't. You can, and you will. Consider it a gift from your grandmother too. She'd want you to have it. The DJ, reading the room with perfect timing, started playing our first dance song. Leon Bridges, Beyond, the one Jake and I had chosen because it reminded us of the first night we'd met, at a benefit concert for the literacy nonprofit where I volunteered. Jake extended his hand to me. Mrs. Morrison, may I have this dance? I took it, and as we moved to the dance floor, the reception slowly came back to life around us. But it was different now. The people who remained, because some had left, my father's business associates mostly, slipping out during Grandpa Henry's speech, felt like our people. The ones who'd chosen to stay after the truth came out. We cut the cake, and it tasted sweeter than I'd imagined. We had our first dance, and Jake held me like I was precious, whispering in my ear that I was the bravest person he'd ever met. His sisters gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. My college friends told embarrassing stories that had nothing to do with money or status and everything to do with the ridiculous adventures we'd had. My father sat silently in the corner the entire time, flanked by empty chairs as guests deliberately avoided his table. Some had moved entirely, asking to be reseated. Others had simply turned their chairs away, a subtle but devastating rejection. Uncle Tom and Aunt Marie had relocated to sit with Jake's family. Even the Chens and the Pattersons, families my father had done business with for decades, kept their distance. I watched him sit there, isolated by his own cruelty, and I waited to feel triumph or vindication. Instead, I just felt sad. Sad for the relationship we'd never had, sad for the father he'd never been, sad for all the years I'd wasted trying to earn love that was always conditional. My mother appeared at my side during a lull in the music, having changed out of her formal dress into slacks and a blouse from the emergency bag she apparently kept in her car. She looked different somehow, lighter, younger, despite the tears streaking her makeup. "I should have done this years ago," she said softly. "I should have protected you from him. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry for all the times I stayed silent." I hugged her, and she held on tight. "I filed the divorce papers online about an hour ago," she whispered. "Emergency petition. I had them drawn up 2 months ago, after I heard him on the phone trying to bribe Jake. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I realized tonight that there would never be a perfect time. There's just now." "Mom, I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm 60 years old, I haven't worked in 35 years, and I have no idea how to be on my own. But watching you tonight, seeing you stand up for yourself, I realized I've been teaching you the wrong lesson your entire life. I taught you to be quiet and accommodating. You taught yourself to be brave." She pulled back and smiled through her tears. "I want to learn that. I want to learn how to be brave like you." Later, as Jake and I drove away toward our honeymoon, a week in a cabin in Vermont, nothing fancy, just us and the mountains and time to breathe, I checked my rearview mirror. Not looking back at the venue, but looking at myself. The girl who'd spent 28 years seeking her father's approval was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth wasn't determined by a last name or a bank balance or by whether she measured up to someone else's definition of success. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Divorce papers filed. Starting over at 60. You inspired me. Thank you. P.S. I'm staying with Aunt Carol for now. She says it's about time I left him. Everyone's been waiting for me to wake up." Asterisk. Another text came through, this one from Grandpa Henry. "Your grandmother is smiling down on you tonight." "So am I, Grandpa." And then one from Emma. "You were magnificent. Call me when you're back from honeymoon. I have 17 job offers from people who were at the wedding and want to hire the woman who took down Richard Matthews." Tears of joy. I smiled and took Jake's hand across the center console. He brought it to his lips and kissed my knuckles. "No regrets?" he asked softly. I thought about it. Really thought about it. I'd just blown up my entire family structure. Rejected an inheritance worth millions. Potentially made myself the subject of gossip in my father's circles, and set in motion a chain of events I couldn't fully predict. "Not even one," I said. Because sometimes the best wedding gift isn't something you receive. Sometimes it's something you give yourself. The freedom to finally live your own life, on your own terms, with people who love you for who you are, not who they want you to be. As we drove into the night, toward our modest honeymoon and our modest apartment and our modestly happy future, I realized my father had been wrong about one thing in particular. I could see the bigger picture. I'd been seeing it all along. He'd just never realized that his version of big and mine were completely different. His was measured in properties and portfolios and prestige. Mine was measured in love and purpose and the courage to choose authenticity over approval. And in the end, my picture was so much bigger than his could ever be.